Hello and welcome to Skeptic Hangout. We have had a little bit of an hiatus, but we are back and we are so happy to announce that we have a couple of new hosts. I'd like to introduce you. Both have been guests on the show before. I'd like to introduce you to Puck and Kelley Laughlin. So we'll start with Puck. Puck, hello, welcome. And what are you doing here?
Thank you. It's so good to be back. You know what? I recorded a few shows with Skeptic Hangout a while back, and you guys were just so great to work with. And the conversation, we got to finally talk about things that I've always wanted to talk about. And I think that conversations are had here that aren't had anywhere else. So it's great to have a space to do that. So when you guys said, "Hey, you want to work with us some more?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm on board. I absolutely want to keep doing this."
Absolutely. Kelley Laughlin is a very good friend of mine. It's someone who I've admired for a long
Yeah.
time, and the opportunity came to ask Kelley to be a host, and I thought there is no way I am not doing so. Kelley, what made you say yes?
Well, actually, it was you because I admire you. I have
Oh,
no idea why you would admire me, but you guys let me do a couple of episodes of this a little while back, and you had me come in and talk about my forte, geology. And then I talked about indoctrination, and it was one of the best shows I think I ever had that I was on, and I really enjoyed it. So when you asked me to come back, I was ecstatic to come and do this again. So I love working
absolutely.
with you and Laura too. So
Yeah, and if just for those long time fans of the show, we haven't lost Laura and Josh. They are still with us. We're going to proceed on a rotating host basis, and for the relaunch, as it were, it was our names drawn out of the hat. So yeah, it's myself, Puck, and Kelley, and we are going to start off with the topic of AI rights. So, gents, who wants to kick us off? Kelley, take us into it. I think yeah, I'll throw the ball to
okay,
you.
I'll start us off. When you first brought the topic up to me, I immediately went to science fiction thoughts. You know, what are the rights of the AI itself? And I started doing a deep dive. Well, I shouldn't say I did a deep dive. I did a little bit more than a wade through the kiddie pool. But I started doing some research on it, and I found out that that's not really the big ethical concerns with AI. And the only people that are really worried about that kind of a thing are the people that aren't involved in AI. And my first thought when I heard that was bear with me now, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that scene where they're having dinner with the mice, and the mice ask Arthur Dent if they can have his brain, and they'll replace it with an electronic brain. And they say nobody will know the difference. And Arthur says, I'll know the difference. And Zaphod says, no, you'll be programmed not to know. Right. And I didn't see how we could have any problem with AI when we are the programmers for it, that any program that comes up like that, or any problem that comes like this, we can just program it out. So we don't have that problem anymore. Does that
Yeah,
make any sense?
it does. I was wondering if we were going to slip into the teletransportation transporter problem then, which I was hoping we weren't, because that was an exciting show between Laura and Josh, which led off to a whole side project that we did. Puck, what do you think? Thoughts?
So yeah, as fascinating as the AI rights question is, which when I first approached the topic, my angle on it was, let's say that we have fully intelligent androids. Just let's bring it truly to sci-fi, and these intelligent androids decide, you know what, we should be entitled to some basic rights. So we are sentient, we should have rights. And I was kind of wondering how that gets handled. Like just to throw out one possible angle, reproductive rights. We agree that humans should have reproductive rights. What does reproductive rights for androids look like? Does that mean they are now in charge of the production facilities that make them? Does that mean that they are in charge of the programming? Does that mean that they can be in charge of a population cap or a population floor if they want it? How exactly do the things that we take for granted as basic human rights translate to an artificial intelligence? And then the other thing that I was thinking about was that we would be biased toward possibly giving more rights to artificial intelligences that look like us than ones that look like, say, R2D2. All right, right. So if someone looks like us, acts like us, relates to us as us, versus a toaster who says, "Hey, I now have rights, and I have a right to life, and I have a right not, to be compensated for my work, and I have a right to refuse work." Where is there a bias because we tend to think of androids? And then Kelley comes in with his thing. It's like, well, all my stuff is completely upended because we have to ask questions long before we get to that, which is we are using artificial intelligence now in a lot of places. For example, job applications, right? There are a lot of AI screening for job applications. So by the time it gets to a human, you're already losing out on 90% of the applications because an AI has screened them out. And then you have to remember, just like Kelley said, how much does the programmer have to do with that? Is it possible that the programmer, intentionally or not, put in some biases in there that may be unfairly affecting the results?
Right.
Yeah.
And even if the programmer is not aware of the bias just might be there in the data, and the AI is picking up on that bias just because of the way it's reading the data.
Yeah, I think for me,
Sorry, go.
I think for me, it's the whole thing about AI is, when do we give AI rights? And I think that is when do we consider them sentient? And that in itself is a huge question, which is possibly a sideline which we might want to avoid. But I think recognizing that sentience in itself is a challenge. There have been studies that show that humans who now talk to the AI we have now, in a lot of cases, cannot actually recognize the difference between an artificial intelligence and a human intelligence in blind studies. And I think that, considering the level of AI we have now, which if you talk to kind of people in the know, my friend Dr. Richard Firth Godby here does a bit of work in the field of AI, and he will tell you the current AI we have is pretty shit. In the kind of grand scheme of what we consider AI to be, when we're looking at kind of what the thing I look at as my standard for AI, which is a good sci-fi film. I think for me, when in blind tests, if we can't tell now, and it's so far removed from what we'd consider sentient. Is now a time to give it rights? Do we base it on rights because we can't tell the difference? If we did a blind test and with 100 people and said, would you give rights to this person? And they all thought it was a genuine human being and said yes. Is that enough, or is there some set of criteria?
And then the interesting question is, what criteria can we have so that exactly brings in what we do want and leaves out what we don't want? Like, maybe an intelligence is not capable of full language speech, right? It doesn't have grammar, doesn't have syntax, but it thinks and processes intelligently. So just because it's not able to speak intelligibly doesn't mean that it doesn't have cognitive functions. But should that still be respected as rights, or do we have a preference, like I said earlier, to things that look and act like us, regardless of what their cognitive functions might actually be? I actually don't know where the line is. Like, my initial gut instinct thought is you give rights when they are capable of asking for rights. But then my thought goes to the time to figure out what those rights are is probably before they ask, right? We should have a pretty good idea where we should even start having this conversation.
See, and I don't think this is all a problem. I just don't think that we don't give them those rights. I'm not sure that we can give a machine those rights, right? It's a weird thing to me. And if we can't, and if they can have that right, are we justified in keeping that right away from them through programming, like I talked about before.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question overall. I remember, I don't remember, and I'm sure my Star Trek geeky friends like Cynthia McDonald and Jason Sherwood will get on my back for this. Not forgetting Johnny Angel, of course. But there's an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where Data is kind of discussing whether he should have rights applied to him or have the right to have rights. And that's full of wonderful ethical concerns in itself. But it's something that, again, in the realm of sci-fi, it's easy to see because we've built up the relationship already with Data as a character. And if we took Data's positronic brain out and laid it on a desk and surrounded it in a hard lump of plastic, would we be as inclined to give that character rights in those circumstances? What are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is I need to start cementing myself in the community as someone who is just as big of a Trekkie as everybody else that you mentioned. Because I will tell you that later in season 7 of that very same show, they had an episode where the entire Enterprise itself started to not only gain sentience, but also to reproduce. Okay, so that was the question. Also, is and they established well within the lore of the show that the Enterprise computer has more calculation and computational power than Data does, just doesn't apply it in the same way. So, is the Enterprise alive? Is it sentient, and does that get rights also? Especially because, as we saw again in season 7, it is capable of reproducing. So, and yeah, I mean, to me, it just goes back to advice. You're absolutely right. We have a relationship with Data. Data looks like us, but take that exact same brain and put it in something that looks not like us. And do we say, yeah, okay, what's the line? Data is a toaster and is the property of Starfleet. So, Kelley, you seem to take a hardline stance on that AI is AI and will always be. Let's go and just use the powerful word here, property.
Yeah, I don't know where to put the stand, where I want to put my stance on this, to be honest with you, but I can see both sides of the coin on this, right? I don't know that a machine should have rights. I honestly don't. I'm not saying it shouldn't. It very well may be allowed to have rights and should have rights. I just don't know. And it makes me wonder, when you're talking about the way the machine looks, I mean, we're dealing with AI right now. That thing that keeps making the ads pop up on your internet feed because of the stuff you looked at 3 days ago, that's AI. Does that deserve sentient? It does display a bit of sentience. Does that deserve rights, that program? Because that's what we're dealing with AI right now. We're not dealing with data. We're dealing with a computer program, right?
Yeah, and
have you guys ever looked into machine learning? Machine learning is so fascinating to study.
I have not, no, and let's go down that route if you want to share a little bit about that with us.
Okay, this is going to be really rough because I know a little bit about it. I know enough about it to tell about it, but not enough to teach about it. But basically, machine learning is the idea that as a computer gets feedback on its decisions, it rewrites its own programming to get better. Now, the most popular way to start this is, let's say, something that's easy for you and I to do, which is recognizing numbers. Okay, like I could show you a number, and the three of us could probably just look at that and say, okay, that is a 7. And for most of the time, even with bad handwriting, we're pretty good and pretty close at figuring out what those are. AI, on the other hand, how exactly do you program that? Well, one great answer is to give it a whole bunch of tests on, let's give you a 1,000 writing samples. You're going to guess which one it is. And then after you guess, we're going to tell you what the correct answer was. And then the computer will actually rewrite back on itself and create new threads in programming so that the answers will continue to get better and better. In essence, it is going beyond its programming, although it can be argued that it is still in the programming to go beyond the programming. So that's basically what machine learning is, where you give a computer a situation where you know what the correct answer is, and then you use those answers to feed back on it so that it can now look at situations it's never looked at before. Image recognition is the tip of the iceberg. We have ones playing chess now. We have ones doing all sorts of crazy, outrageous things. But basically, that's what machine learning is. It's going past the initial programming to learn and to get better.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point of distinction for me. And for me, it comes. This is the crux of the kind of conversation and the question we're asking: is there a difference between machine learning and machine learning through its programming and a machine being sentient? And even sentience itself is not always easy to define. But I think. Can we demonstrate that a machine as a bare minimum that displays these attributes is in fact self-aware as a bare minimum? And I think I'm not sure we're at that stage that where we can truly say a machine is self-aware even. And but I don't know. It's a very, very difficult avenue to go down, and I suppose this is why it makes such a good subject in sci-fi and ethics, because it's a good question to be asking. I'm not sure where I stand on which point. I will say about the algorithms that we see on kind of social media and stuff. I might buy a set of jeans one week, and I'll get an algorithm for a book the next on tennis shoes. I don't think the algorithms used in social media in AI are particularly good, not in my experience anyway. And I mean, it's certainly better than I could program. But by the same stretch of imagination, it's not something I'd confuse as a human intelligence, like people doing these tests with AI.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of brings up the question too of how much sentience does the machine have to have before we want to take this kind of action? Where do we draw the line, and how much sentience makes something have the ability to have rights? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, because we don't want to.
Are you sentient enough?
Like we might want to give data rights, but we don't want to give that program that's deciding what to throw into our internet feed rights. You know what I mean? And they're both working off the same principles. They're both artificial intelligence. So it's a really weird, nebulous topic, right?
And is it ethical to give one rights and not the other if they can be demonstrated to have the same level of intelligence and self-awareness and sentience?
I was just going to bring up the self-awareness because you mentioned it too. Is that a milestone that we want to use? Because I'm pretty sure my dog is self-aware. So if that's the milestone we're going to use, that means we're going to give the machine rights, then we got to start giving my dog rights too.
And this comes back to what Puck kind of said earlier about them being made in our own image, and that being I think something that will be taken into account when we're considering this question. I think that's always going to play a role when we're assigning rights to people. We do it anyway. We even amongst other human beings, we assign more kind of I don't want to say rights as such, but we certainly give more value to human beings who look like us as a species than we do as to the ones who don't. And of course, it's completely wrong to do that. But it's been shown in studies that even if we profess to have no bias towards people, I don't consider myself discriminatory, that word, to any particular set of people outside my own kind of race and ethnic background. And yet studies have shown that we do it. We all do it. And, do we take these kind of really important studies regarding our subconscious into consideration when we're applying rights to AI? And if we don't, does it or would it have an effect on the way we then interact with AI, and indeed the way AI interacted with us?
It's a good question.
So many possible ways to go here, and like the no, and I was like just drawn by what Kelly said. So no offense, Richard, but you're
No.
right. Those are great questions.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking now, like after Kelly told me about it, I started thinking about ways that AI is being used right now, and how that's already getting us into trouble. For example, Jesse Gender has a fantastic video out there. Plug. If you ever want to do a show with us, you call me. Um, uh, had a fantastic video about how an AI face recognition software was used very poorly because it wasn't very good at recognizing for a gender critical site to find cis women only. And it did a miserable job, especially when dealing with people of different ethnicities. Does not do very good recognition. So that project got abandoned fairly quickly. But people are using AI now to in a way to justify bigotry. And I think that's where it's going to be a huge problem, where it's like, well, this is what the computer said. Look, this can't be biased if it's a computer saying it. So if the computer is saying, well, I'm sorry, only 2% of homeowner loans now go to African Americans in the United States. Well, now we run into a problem, because now you have scientifically justified bigotry, if you want to call it that, where at least a small subset of the population is going to say, you know what, this cannot be a human bias. This cannot be racism, because this is a computer, which by definition can't be racist. but
Right,
but
exactly.
we're already running into problems with this, and I think, like, if we don't address those problems, who cares if it asks for rights? It can't even get this basic job correct.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what we're finding today is that, I mean, one of the reasons we instituted artificial intelligence was to get rid of these human biases. And we're finding out the AI has the same biases because we're feeding the garbage into it. Right. That's a problem. That's a problem. If we're feeding our biases into the AI is just going to come back biased.
Yeah, and I think this is well known by all sorts of people, not just programmers, but people who run businesses, that you can, if you want your figures to say one thing rather than another thing, if you feed the appropriate information into that, then you can kind of control the staff by saying, well, the figures say this, and there's not much they can argue against because you've got the data in front of you. And that already happens in business. It already happens in throughout all walks of life, and I don't see that changing just because we're using AI.
Yeah, I agree. And that's an inherent problem that we're going to have to try to tackle. And I'm not sure how we get around the bias that's already inherent in the system, that's already inherent in the data within the system.
Yeah.
And doesn't take into account current trends in society and history that have gotten us to where we are. Mistakes that we're trying to fix. It's and the different things that we're trying to do for it. It's like, yes, strictly speaking, this is what the data says, but it is contrary to the goal that we want to have of addressing previous harms and concerns.
Absolutely. I think just through the last couple of minutes, we've kind of talked ourselves out of giving AI any rights whatsoever. And I think this is the benefit of these kinds of conversations, because you can kind of pretty quickly nail down on something as specific as whether AI should have rights. Certainly currently, I would suggest it's probably not the best way forward. When we're so loosely, first of all, we don't really know how to properly define AI and where it's going. And as Puck said earlier on, which I think is very, very important, that where it's going has to be a consideration in this. It has to be a consideration. We can't just assume that it's going to remain static, because by its very nature, it is something that is going to grow and become more. If it's self-aware now, which it isn't, but if it was, it would become more self-aware as time went on. And I think that's blatantly obvious, as proposed by every sci-fi film any of us have ever watched.
We just program it not to be self-aware. I don't understand what the problem is.
Well, I wouldn't even know how to program something to be self-aware or just to say it is self-aware. Like you've heard of what the Turing test is, right? Like the Turing test in
Yeah.
theory is a
Yes.
test that's
Yes.
designed to be able to differentiate. But the weird thing is an artificial intelligence that's smart enough to be able to pass the Turing test, in theory, is also smart enough to know that it shouldn't. Right. So, it's like, so how do you know that it's not that it failed the test, it's that it saw right through the test.
So we have about 10 minutes left. So let's start wrapping up our thoughts. Kelley.
When you first told me we were going to do AI, and like I said, I jumped right to the sci-fi thoughts about it, and I Googled problems with AI, and the first thing that came up was, how can we make AI better and cheaper so that every business can use it? And that seemed to be the biggest problem with AI. But then when you talk to people like us that aren't involved in the technology, it seems like we're all thinking about these sci-fi topics up with it. And I'm not so sure that this is the time to be going that far with it, or that we're even going to get to that point. And I think we need to iron out the current problems we're having with AI before we really start moving it forward and thinking about these things that might happen. So
Yeah,
that's my big thought on it, I think.
I think on that point, my concern with that is that, as history has showed, that, and I agree in principle with you. I think the difficulty is history has shown we don't take that time to kind of stop and assess things, and I think before we know it, that technology will be on us, and we won't have given that opportunity to have those kind of conversations around when or how we do that. Puck.
Yeah, no, so when I'm thinking about now with those AI rights, is now I'm trying to think about limiting where businesses are allowed to use those. Like, sure, to decide what ads to put on your social media feed is one thing, but they're using AI to make a lot more decisions. And at some point, you could say, yeah, it's just taking a large amount of data and coming up with the best ways to do to manage it, especially for a large number of users. But then now you have to be mindful of taking social concerns into consideration, which an AI is almost certainly not going to do. So much more than controlling the AI itself, I'm starting to think about how can we fairly restrict how a business uses it in relation to the human element of it. Maybe it's with job applications, maybe it's where do we open up a new location, maybe it's what kind of information do we give to our email subscriber list. Like and subscribe for more Skeptic Hangout. So that's my next thought. Like if we were to have a follow-up episode of this, it would be what our business is currently using AI for. Should they be doing that? What are the repercussions, and what should we be doing instead?
Do you think then we've got our? I don't mean just we on this show, but I mean people collectively in general have got looking at this from the wrong angle and looking at it from too much of a sci-fi angle, because that's the angle I kind of come in at when I think about AI. And before we even consider whether AI should have rights, we consider the ethical kind of questions around using it to begin with, and in what circumstances it should be used.
Yeah, I think you're right. And one of the things that when I was doing my research that came up was privacy, because the AI doesn't seem to really recognize a person's privacy yet. And that's something we're going to need to work on. It's something that's definitely a problem already.
Oh,
No,
no, I was just thinking then you could just program it not to do anything bad with that information. It's like if we have an AI that tracks cars so that we can study better traffic flow within a city to decide where we should build new roads, simply program that AI to stop gathering information at a certain point. So it's like we run back into the same problems.
Yeah, and again that relies on the programmer rather than the program itself to be ethical enough to do that. And certainly they've in some quarters already with some forms of not necessarily even artificial intelligence, but the way with technology is used, there are ethical concerns about privacy and things like that. I remember with I don't remember the name of the mobile phone company, but I think there was a Chinese mobile phone manufacturer where the phones were just stopped being sold in the US altogether because of the concerns around data and privacy. They were still sold in Britain, I think, but I think I seem to recall that they were just completely stopped the sales of them in the US exactly because of the privacy issues. Now, if you've got that with something that's not intelligent, which is just technology, how much more is that going to be amplified by something that does have an ability to learn and kind of make decisions based on its programming, whether it's sentient or not? If you've got someone unscrupulous doing the programming to begin with, which I'm sure in many cases there will be, should this be limited? This has been it's been a fascinating conversation, and there's so many directions we could take this. Any final thoughts before we end the conversation, gents?
Only that I'm glad that we're having them, and yeah, there's like five more episodes to be had just from what we talked about here. So let's do it. Let's talk about Turing tests. Let's talk about privacy in our machines. Let's talk about I think the company that you're talking about is Tencent Media. So let's look up Tencent Media and actually find out all the crazy things that Chinese companies are doing with our information. Yeah, this is a fantastic starting point. Great coming back from hiatus. This is beautiful. It was an honor to share the stage with you, gentlemen.
Kelley, final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts are the one thing that I'm really wondered about right here is what are the ethics of us allowing the machine, the AI, to have that advanced intelligence? Is that ethical to allow the machine to do that, or is it ethical to keep the machine from doing that? And that's probably the biggest question here. It's not should we give it the right, do we have the right to not give it, because that's really what we're in the position to do. We can keep the machinery, we can keep the AI from having the intelligence that we don't want it to have, but is that ethical? And that's something I think we should think about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic, gents. If you want to have your say, please pop along to the Skeptic Hangout discussion group on Facebook and share your thoughts with us on this subject. We will be back next week, and we will see you then.